At 4:17 hours local time, the surface search radar aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer detected 3 fast-moving contacts emerging from the clutter of the Persian Gulf coastline. Speed, 52 knots and accelerating. Heading, direct intercept. Distance, 38 nautical miles, and closing fast. The USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group had been conducting routine maritime security operations in international waters. Flight operations were minimal, sea state calm, visibility moderate, the kind of quiet that makes sailors uneasy. Inside the Combat Information Center, the radar supervisor narrowed his eyes at the screen. 3 small radar returns, low profile, tight formation, no AIS transponders, fast attack craft. Within seconds, the contacts were classified as probable IRGC Navy high-speed boats, small, heavily armed platforms designed for asymmetric warfare. Individually, they were insignificant. Together, in confined waters, they could become something else entirely. At 4:19, the tactical picture sharpened. The 3 boats split into a shallow wedge formation, spacing out by 600 yards. That wasn't random. That was doctrine. Multiple angles of approach to complicate defensive targeting solutions. Someone had trained them well. The Persian Gulf is narrow, crowded, shallow. It neutralizes size advantage and magnifies speed. For decades, Iranian naval doctrine has emphasized swarm tactics. Fast boats armed with rockets, anti-ship missiles, and heavy machine guns, overwhelming larger vessels through speed and surprise. But this was no swarm. This was something more deliberate. The boats maintained strict radio silence, infrared signatures low, running without navigation lights. They hugged commercial traffic lanes, blending into radar clutter from oil tankers and container ships. At 4:22, an E-2D Hawkeye orbiting at 25,000 feet confirmed visual classification. 3 Iranian Boghammer-style fast attack craft. Estimated armament, possible short-range anti-ship missiles, unguided rockets, heavy Dishka machine guns. Speed now, 58 knots. Time to intercept outer defensive perimeter, 11 minutes. Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group did not panic. It shifted. The cruiser USS Bunker Hill altered course 5 degrees to port, tightening the formation. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers expanded outward, forming a layered defensive ring. Helicopters on deck were spun up but held in standby. No warning shots, no escalation. Yet. The carrier herself adjusted speed to 22 knots, a subtle move, just enough to complicate the intercept geometry of the approaching boats. At 4:25, the Iranian formation accelerated again, now 62 knots. They were committed. The first sign this wasn't a reckless harassment maneuver came seconds later. Electronic support measures aboard the cruiser detected brief radar emissions from the lead boat. Short pulse, narrow beam, possibly target confirmation, possibly data link, then silence again. The Iranian crews weren't amateurs. Inside CIC, the tactical action officer made a quiet assessment. If they launch anything inside 10 miles, we're in close defense territory. That's where even the most powerful warship becomes vulnerable, not because it lacks weapons, but because reaction windows shrink to seconds. At 4:27, the boats split further. One veered slightly north, 2 south. They were attempting a pincer approach, forcing the strike group to divide its defensive fire arcs. Classic asymmetric maneuver. At 4:28, without warning, the northernmost Iranian boat fired. A plume of smoke burst from its stern. Infrared tracking confirmed it wasn't a large anti-ship missile, but a smaller rocket-propelled munition, possibly a modified C-701 short-range missile or unguided rocket. Range at launch, 14 nautical miles. The missile skimmed low over the water. Within 2 seconds, the cruiser's combat system reacted. Fire control solution calculated. Intercept trajectory locked. A standard missile launched vertically, punching into the dark sky before arcing toward its target. 6 seconds later, a flash on the horizon. Intercept confirmed. The Gulf lit up for a heartbeat. But that was only the beginning. The 2 southern boats increased speed again, now racing at nearly 65 knots. Their bows slammed against the chop as they closed distance with reckless determination. At 4:30, both southern boats fired in quick succession. Multiple heat signatures, rockets, possibly small anti-ship missiles. The defensive envelope activated in layers. First layer, long-range interceptors. Second layer, close-in missile systems. Third layer, phalanx Sea-Whiz rotating, radar tracking, waiting. The sky turned into a geometry problem solved at supersonic speed. 2 incoming projectiles were intercepted at range. One slipped through debris clouding and came within 3 nautical miles before a CRAM system engaged. The missile detonated midair. Shrapnel rained into the Gulf. The carrier remained untouched. At 4:32, the Iranian boats crossed the 10 nautical mile threshold. Now the threat shifted. At that range, even small boats with heavy machine guns or explosive payloads could pose danger, especially if suicide tactics were involved. Helicopters finally launched. MH-60 Seahawks lifted from the destroyers, banking low over the water toward the incoming craft. From above, the picture was clearer. The northern boat appeared damaged from the shockwave of its own failed launch. Speed had dropped. The 2 southern boats continued. Then something unexpected happened. The lead southern boat slowed rapidly. Thermal cameras showed smoke from its engine housing, mechanical failure, or perhaps damage from nearby intercept blasts. Within seconds, it veered off course, dead in the water. The final boat pressed alone. At 4:34, 1 Iranian fast boat remained charging toward a U.S. carrier strike group. Distance, 6 nautical miles. Helicopters moved into position, issuing warnings over loudspeaker in Persian and English. No response. The boat's bow lifted slightly as it accelerated one final time. From the air, observers spotted something chilling. Multiple cylindrical objects strapped across its deck. Explosives. This wasn't harassment. It was a suicide run. The destroyer's captain made the call. Engage. A precision 25mm autocannon from the helicopter opened fire first, stitching rounds across the waterline of the speeding craft. Sparks, splinters, but it kept coming. At 4.2 nautical miles, the destroyer's close-in weapon system engaged. A stream of tungsten rounds ripped across the dark sea. The fast boat erupted in flame. Then a secondary explosion detonated with violent force. The blast was far larger than fuel alone could explain. By 4:40, the surface was clear. 1 Iranian boat disabled and drifting, 1 crippled and abandoned, 1 obliterated in a catastrophic detonation. The carrier group had not suffered a single hit, but the implications were enormous. 3 small fast boats had attempted to breach one of the most heavily defended naval formations on Earth. They had coordinated, maneuvered intelligently, and pressed an attack to near-suicidal conclusion. And they had been stopped. Not by brute force alone, but by layered defense, discipline, and technological integration. By sunrise, regional monitoring stations and satellites had captured the aftermath. Images of smoke plumes, thermal signatures, disabled boats adrift. Official statements would later describe the event as a defensive engagement following hostile intent. But the real message was more complex. Asymmetric warfare can harass, it can provoke, it can test. But when it crosses the threshold into direct attack, it collides with a defensive ecosystem designed to absorb and neutralize precisely that threat. The Persian Gulf returned to calm. Commercial tankers resumed their steady transit. Carrier flight operations resumed by 0600. Jets launched into the morning light as if nothing had happened. 3 fast boats had hunted a carrier group in confined waters, believing speed and surprise could offset scale. Instead, they triggered a chain reaction of layered defense that turned their own explosive payload into a self-inflicted inferno. In modern naval warfare, the smallest spark can ignite a regional crisis. But sometimes it simply burns out at sea. And as the Theodore Roosevelt steamed steadily eastward, its escorts scanning the horizon, one thing was clear: hunting a carrier group is easy. Surviving the encounter is something else entirely. Bye for now.